Hi G2, welcome to the final week of our small group series looking at the stories of women in the Bible. And today we'll be covering the story of Rahab in the book of Joshua. So where are we in the story and narrative of the Old Testament? So briefly, so far we've had the story of Moses and the exile of the Israelites out of Egypt. And then the Israelites are being given the Ten Commandments and the law through Moses, and they've gone out in search of the Promised Land. Now, along that journey, they've faced difficulties and challenges. They'd be squabbling against each other, and unfortunately, Moses never got to see the Promised Land. And as Moses passed away, his successor Joshua took up the mantle, and in Joshua 1 we saw God blessing Joshua with words of encouragement and also instructions to keep to the law, and he encouraged him to go out in conquest for the Promised Land, which was set in the land of Canaan. Now, where are we actually in the world? So in the world right now, the land of Canaan sits somewhere around Israel, in Gaza, in Lebanon. And this story, the story of Rahab, is the first start of that conquest, where the Israelites go across the River Jordan, which goes up from the Dead Sea, and they go and first tackle the city of Jericho, which has these two massive walls around it. So let's see where the story takes us and how Rahab comes into it by reading Joshua 2. And let's have a little think of the question, what 3 words you could use to describe Rahab's story after reading it. I hope you guys have had some great discussions, some great chats. And what really struck me with story of Rahab is how bravely she acted out of faith first. She had no idea what the spies were going to do, that she was hiding in her house, and she had no idea whether the guards would take her bait. And if they didn't, she knew that this would be fatal. This would doom her and her family for hiding spies. And she had no idea whether her faith in God would come through, whether his promises would be upheld. And we can see that act of faith that she had massively reverberated throughout the Bible. And we can see her story actually mentioned twice in the New Testament. We can see in Hebrews 11, verse 31, we have, by faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. We also have in the book of James, we have James 2, verse 25, in the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? So let's read where her act of faith and her act of bravery, what comes from it. Well, let's see where the story finishes. In Joshua 6, verse 20 to 25. Have a read, and then we'll get right back. So, despite Rahab's background as a prostitute, which at the time in the society that the world was like, she would have been deeply looked down upon. And we can see that her background was really important to the writers of the New Testament. And she would have been deeply looked down upon by her background. And despite Rahab's gender, in a society which was controlled by cruel kings across Canaan, she was seen by God as righteous. and she was accepted into his plan, and she was accepted into his community and his story. We can even see in Matthew that ultimately God's son was descendant actually from Rahab. So she's being completely a part of the story of Jesus as well. In God's so what can we learn about God from Rahab's story? So God's decision to use Rahab, to honor her bravery, her sacrifice, by protecting her, it shows us that God does not allow people's backgrounds or gender or where they're from influence whether he loves or chooses us or how he chooses to use us. He sees the potential in all of us and accepts everyone and their faith in him. And we can see how he completely embraces Rahab into his family and how important that is to him. And we can also see, even though God was terrifying at the time, and Rahab was completely terrified of him, God is merciful, and he was merciful to people outside of the Israelite community as well. So to finish, I have some questions that you may find helpful to process in your small groups. So after listening to Rahab's story and the way it challenges the social expectations at the times, have a go at answering and chatting through and processing these two questions. In particular, what kind of examples of social standards and expectations in today's world, such as gender inequality and discrimination, how does that potentially stop us from serving God or influence our view of God? And how can we become more aware of God's actions across the world? And how can we challenge the discrimination we face in our lives to serve God better? And at the end, pray for each other for any breakthrough and pressures that are set on us, or our prayer for how we can act and serve God bravely in our faith like Rahab did.